Hey, this is part 2 of becoming a mobile game designer, an inside look into the hiring process. If you remember, where we left off was, we first looked at the company SuperScale, a mobile game publisher and growth scaler out of Bratislava, Slovakia. We touched briefly on the position that I was applying for, which was mobile game designer. And we looked over part 1 of the assignment, we went through the questions, and then talked a bit about the index of power and what that would mean in terms of our answer to the assignment. Now in part 2, we'll go over my answers, but I want to address a few things. When I first read over the assignment, I didn't know how deep the rabbit hole went with RPGs. So much respect to everyone who focuses on this game genre. It's a lot more complicated than I thought. There are many discussion forums, there are many articles, and there are many right ways to do this. I looked over a bunch of different games for reference. The one I chose, and I think I mentioned it in the last video, was Earthbound. Earthbound growing up was my favorite RPG. I played that game religiously. I bought the version, the giant box with the walkthrough guide, and I followed that. I've played it multiple times. I tried to find all the little secret ins and outs. That game was so perfectly designed, in my opinion, in terms of level progression, that I thought it would be perfect to kind of use that as a reference to my answers. And if I was ever going to design an RPG game, I would definitely go that route first. But again, it's very deep. It's also very mathematical, and that is a negative. I'm not a mathematics guy. I'm not a programmer. I mentioned that before. My background is sales, marketing, customer support. I just ventured into game design as a passion, as a way to make money. I designed an arcade game. I designed a quiz game. I haven't touched RPG. I haven't touched multiplayer. Those are genres that are out of my scope. I did learn a little bit of programming and a little bit of Unity because I had to. I couldn't keep hiring people to do these little jobs for me. I had to learn how to do it myself. So I did put a lot of work into it, but I'm not a programmer and I don't have a strong background in math. And to design an RPG, you're working a lot with numbers. You're working a lot with graphs, calculations, game balance, XP, speed, agility, defense, attack. Everything under the hood for these type of games is math. So those that are top notch in this field, I want you to forgive me for some of my answers and some of my math calculations. You'll see that they'll have unnecessary errors in them, and they will be brought up in a future video when we talk about their response to my answers. But I'm going to keep everything as it was when it was first handed in. I'm also not in current game design mode, and I haven't been in this mode for a while now. I've moved on to other things. You guys can see I have this YouTube channel. I'm doing online courses in other subjects, so forgive me that I'm not as sharp as I used to be. I am slowly getting back into it because I am designing, of course, in game design of everything I learned over the few years that I did it, but for now I'm still a little out of it. So with all that being said, let's go through the answers. We'll start with my email to them when I handed in the assignment. So it goes, "Hey guys, thank you for the opportunity to complete this introductory assignment for SuperScale. The two assignments are attached in PDF format. Assignment number 1 was made in Google Docs plus Google Sheets, and assignment number 2 was made with Google Slides. Assignments are also linked below." I linked the 3 assignments. "Let me know if you need me to expand on or clarify any of the answers. Also, let me know if you have trouble accessing any of the documents. I look forward to your feedback. Wes." And then I linked all of the appropriate documents and made sure I shared it on Google Drive to make sure it was received, because when you're dealing with clients, especially in a remote position, everything needs to be neat. It needs to be laid out and accessible by your clients, your team, and any third-party departments that need to get their hands on them. So I think that's a big enough intro. Let's start going through the answers. I'm not going to talk much more than what I wrote, because at the time I thought a lot about what I was going to say. Like, I spent 30 hours on this project. That's not including research and thought time coming up with my answers. I never did this before, so I really had to think through what I was going to say, and I think I laid everything out perfectly. So I'll just read through the assignment. Every once in a while I'll add some thoughts in, but for the most part it'll just be me reading. So assignment number 1, the core principles of scaling. The player must not be aware that the game is scaling with them. An example is simple bandits in the Elder Scrolls number 4 Oblivion. They were noticeably changing difficulty when the hero grew in power. During the later stages, bandits were armed with top tier weapons and armor, but still gave the same amount amount of gold as before. This was a major complaint for fans of the series. Number 2, the player must feel that as the hero gets stronger, the game gets easier. If it doesn't get easier, then there is no use for farming, which is spending time killing lower level enemies in order to progress to a higher level, or spending on in-app purchases. And another word for that is grinding. In a lot of games, people like to avoid fighting the current boss and fight a lot of just lower level enemies to grow their levels so that the boss is easier. The RPG games must be predictable. They must feel almost like real life, that if you work to get stronger, if you improve your skills, then the game will be easier. In theory, the game must maintain roughly the same degree of difficulty from beginning to end. We must keep the player engaged and challenged throughout the story, but if it gets too tough, players will become anxious and give up. And we all know that if the game gets too easy, people will get bored and not play. The formula should contain a random element. I think that no two player experiences should be the same, but they should be similar, and this is especially true for multiplayer games. So question 1 was proposed scaling of main stats and secondary stats. All relevant results and simulations expressed below are demonstrated thoroughly in the level scaling Google Sheet. So we'll take a quick look at that now. The sheet looks like this. I have it laid out with all the proper RPG fields. So we got their level number, how many XP points it takes to get to that level, their HP points at each level, damage, attack speed, the critical percentage, the critical damage percentage, leech percentage, block and destroy percentage, and then their index of power. So I made that for the hero all the way down to level 60, made that for the enemies all the way down to level 60, and then in question 5 we talk about how changing of some of the stats will affect the index of power, and I made a new sheet for that as well. Going back to the assignment, this was the proposed scaling formula for XP, and I wanted it to be an exponential increase at later periods, ensure a capped level progression. Quick level progression as a beginner helps teach the game mechanics and gets player hooked, so that's why I chose an exponential graph. So you can see it doesn't take a lot to gain for the early levels, but once you get to higher levels, it takes a lot of XP. The scaling formula for XP, I made it a minimally exponential, but it stays manageable for larger level designs. And what I meant for larger level designs was for games that don't want to cap at a level 60 or level 100, they want to go to level 500, they want to keep people engaged. I think that's a good formula for that. The scaling formula for damage, it's a linear progression with a minor random element that causes small fluctuations in the graph. No two game experiences are alike, yet each level will be within a range of possible values. The scaling formula for attack speed is also linear progression with a minor random element. Smaller possible fluctuations for attack speed because total values are generally less than the other stats. The scaling formula for critical percentage, I chose a logarithmic equation to assure limited growth during the higher levels. Critical hit percentage should be somewhat rare to give the player a sense of reward when it first occurs. The stat cap is at 30% to keep balance with the other stats. However, the amount of critical damage dealt does continue to grow linearly. And I like the idea of slowing down the growth of critical percentage, because if you had a game where the critical percentage grew exponentially or just even grew linearly, towards the end levels you'll be getting a critical strike on every attack, and that's not fun. The game gets way too easy. The scaling formula for critical damage percentage, level 1 is 60% increase of the normal damage, and then a linear progression with a randomized element that is calculated at the time of attack. So to keep things interesting, at the current critical damage level, you'll have a fluctuation in how much damage percentage you're actually dealt. So I made this plus or minus 10%. That was my randomized element. The baseline value is increased with level progression, and the actual damage dealt is determined during battle when the critical percentage is activated. So it's determined when it is initiated, and there is no cap on the stat. The scaling formula for leech percentage, I also chose a logarithmic equation to assure limited growth during the higher levels. Leech skills should be rare. Formula is divided by 8 to get lower values. This stat has a cap of 25% chance to avoid abuse. 100% chance of leeching 20% health would negate the effects of the other skills. And the point of using this type of equation is so that this stat percentage is capped. Like critical percentage, we don't want the leech skill being activated on every hit, because then the game gets too easy. So the scaling formula for block percentage, I also chose that type of expression with a randomized element. It's calculated during battle at the time of defense against the attack, and a cap at 100% means the attack is fully blocked. So I thought that block block percentage should every once in a while entirely block the attack, and whether it does or not is determined based on a random element that is calculated at the time of the block being initiated. The scaling formula for destroy percentage, logarithmic expression with a hard cap at 50%. The stat is different than critical damage percentage because it is solely based on the enemy XP. Therefore, destroy percentage is potentially more deadly and shouldn't progress as fast as the other stats in order to remain balanced. Now, I might be wrong on this and I'm going to try to remember, but I think destroy percentage being based on the enemy XP means that it's not more deadly. If someone can help me out on this one, because I'm thinking if a higher level player is fighting a lower level enemy, their HP would be a lot lower, and so if it initiated the destroy percentage of, let's say, 50%, it would only take 50% of that lower HP compared to a critical damage percentage, which could kill the entire enemy in one shot. So we'll move on from that. If you have any thoughts on that one, please leave it in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you guys think there. Here I go into the scaling formula for main and secondary stats, so some possible additions. You can introduce a growth factor that is different for each character dependent on their specialties, and Earthbound fans would know that that is an influence on Earthbound. Characters like Jeff and their IQ scale differently than Paula and her PP. This factor is multiplied for each stat that it affects, and it's great for games with multiple party characters that join hero in his or her quest. Offensive players have larger damage or attack speed increases. Defensive players have larger HP or block percentage increases, like you multiply the HP formula by an extra 3%. Mage players have larger PP increases, etc. Question number 2. How do main and secondary stats affect the overall index of power of a hero? Propose an index of power of the hero and apply it to the first 60 levels. Based on his email, the index of power is one number which describes how the main and secondary stats influence the power of hero. In order to obtain it, you need to create some kind of formula. Here you need to apply your creativity that would use all or some of the stats and which could subsequently be used to show the player as well, so they can grasp better the importance of leveling up power deficit versus enemies. I talked about this in the last video, but I think that just the regular level number is enough to show if you are stronger than the enemy. I don't think you need an extra index of power. If you're level 50 and you're fighting an enemy that's level 45, it's generally believed that you're stronger. If he's level 55 and you're 50, it's believed that he is stronger. So I think the index of power and your actual level are pretty similar numbers, and I don't think it's needed, but I went along with it anyways. I said in a perfectly balanced game, the main and secondary stats should affect the index of power in a non-exploitive way, meaning that a player cannot abuse the difficulty of the game by finding one unbalanced stat and then only improving that stat to get more powerful. For most RPGs, the index of power is synonymous with the level of the character. If you are level 50 and the enemy is level 40, you have a basic understanding of your power towards that enemy. In this case, you are more powerful. Okay, so I did write this in the assignment. For the assignment, I have developed a new number that takes all main and secondary stats into consideration and applied a weighted value based on its importance to power. This number will be called the index of power. First, to arrive at this number, all stats must be balanced to avoid inflation. The HP numerical value is much larger than the damage, even though their weights on the index are similar. Once balanced, all stats will be multiplied by their weighted values and then added together to give an overall index of power. The weight of each stat are as follows. HP, 25% of the index of power. HP is the most important stat and therefore gets the most weight in the formula. Without hit points, the hero cannot attack. The hero dies and loses the game. Damage I thought should be worth 17%. Damage is the second most important factor because it indicates how long the battle will last. The more damage you deal out, the quicker the battle ends and the less chance at death. Attack speed, 13%. Attack speed is an important factor to consider because it determines who will go first in a new battle. The first mover in most games will have the advantage. Critical percentage, 8%. Though it doesn't occur often, getting the chance at a critical strike can prove to be the deciding factor in a battle. Critical damage percentage, 12%. If the hero can deal out 100% increase in damage, smaller enemies stand no chance and can be killed in one hit. Leech percentage equals 4%. Not as important as the other stats, healing 20% of health can be less than one enemy hit. Block percentage, 8%. Completely negating an enemy attack is the same as getting 2 turns in a row. 2 turns means a better chance at killing the enemy enemy before the hero takes any damage. So that's why I had it at 8%. Destroy percent equals 13%. As important as attack speed, the amount of damage dealt could be catastrophic. I think I disagree with that now. I think that should be lower. This is just a simple formula for the index of power, adding all those percentages up. Please see the hero tab in the level scaling sheet for a demonstration on the index of power for the hero for the first 60 levels, and I'll quickly show that again. Here was the column for index of power, and I divided it based on the skill of the player. I have beginner, novice, rookie, intermediate, skillful, and a seasoned player. Number 3, how do the main and secondary stats affect the index of power of enemies? Propose an index of power of the enemies and apply to the first 60 levels. For enemies, the weighted values of each stat are slightly different. There is greater importance on attack and defense because they spawn and die so frequently. And that's true, you only have one hero, but you have many enemies. The strength of each stat is also fixed by the developer, which means that balance or imbalance can be manufactured based on preference or by the world or each type of map. Dependent on which secondary stat is randomized for the enemy, the index of power will shift. Damage percentage will shift the index of power the most, and critical percentage will shift it the least. Here's the index of power formula for the enemies, and I'll quickly show you how that looks on the enemies page. As you can see, it's slightly different and slightly below the hero, so the hero is always ahead of the index of power. Question 4. Do a difficulty curve for the first 60 levels of a hero and enemies. Explain your reasoning and support it with arguments. There are 3 philosophies and therefore 3 methods of designing difficulty in RPGs. They are: number 1, the difficulty should be scaled slightly easier than the hero's level. Number 2, the difficulty should be scaled at the hero's level. Or number 3, the difficulty should be scaled slightly harder than the hero's level. And depending on the type of game you're making, if it's more of a social game, you might choose number 1. If it's more of like a hardcore type of game, you might choose number 3. Though each philosophy has its place in gaming and each can be implemented correctly, I think that a fluctuating balance between options 2 and 3 provide the most challenge, the most excitement, the best player experience, the longest average session time, because you need to do farming and replay old levels in order to advance. And when you're creating a mobile game, the longer they can stay on the platform, the better chance at seeing an ad or buying an in-app purchase. And I mentioned that in my next point. It's the highest possibility for in-app purchase spend and monetization. Some gamers will spend money in order to level up faster and beat the difficult bosses. So a perfect difficulty design would look roughly like the graph below. It would oscillate between easy and hard, scaling linearly as players work their character skills up in order to beat the current level. Then they find that the next level is too hard at their current power and repeat the process. The peaks are usually climaxes of the game when the player fights a level boss, and the valleys are regular gameplay elements against the normal enemies. And I show an example of that difficulty curve. The hero skill is right in the middle and the game difficulty oscillates between that. Question 5, do an index of power of a hero if the secondary stats would work differently as explained here. If leech had a fixed 20% to restore a percentage of the hero's health, if block had a percent chance to block 50% amount of enemy damage, destroy a certain percent chance to deal fixed 20% health damage of the enemy as true damage. So for all 3 stats, it would cause the index of power to shift higher in the early levels but even out or even diminish at the later levels. Overall, these changes will all benefit the hero and improve his power during the first 60 levels and hurt the hero past that stage. So I show the new index of power formula, and then I say please see question 5 new index of power tab in the level scaling to show a demonstration of these new values, and we'll look at that quickly now. As you can see, it's very similar to the regular hero index of power, but the numbers are slightly different. Question 6, propose one active and one passive skill and show their impact on the difficulty curve. So the active skill I chose was run away. When used, the hero immediately exits the battle. This skill would have no effect on the difficulty curve if there is no negative consequence to dying. So in some games, when you die, you lose all your gold or you lose all your items or you start back at the beginning of the map. So the skill run away would be a huge benefit if you did have those negative effects, because you could avoid dying in battle and give yourself a chance to heal or sleep or recover. The passive skill I chose was strength. So when you use this skill, it adds 20% onto the damage skill. This skill decreases the difficulty in favor of the hero because battles would be easier and enemies would die faster. So I show the new difficulty curve with the strength passive skill. And if we look at the previous graph, you can see the hero skill line is more towards the bottom of the oscillating game difficulty. With the strength, it's a little more towards the top. So the bosses get a bit easier, and the regular gameplay of killing the default enemies gets a lot easier. Number 7, how would the balance of the game change if HP would be replenished to full only after hero gains a level, and the game would be much harder and provide more emphasis on healing, health regeneration spells or food rest, defense, blocking or armor, and leveling up. Players would need to exercise caution, plan strategies accordingly, and take less risks when approaching higher levels and higher level bosses. Question 8, propose 3 battle consumables and show their impact on the difficulty curve. So I chose a healing potion. This heals HP plus 150, can be used in battle or out of battle to replenish the hero's health. Healing potions can be purchased from stores or dropped by enemies killed in battle. Number 2, I chose a voodoo idol. This casts a spell on one enemy, causing a rapid deterioration of its HP throughout the battle. HP drops by -15 every turn. And then I chose 3 Herb of Confidence. This is a little Earthbound thing. When eaten, the Herb of Confidence increases the critical percentage skill by 25% for that battle only. Players need to plan appropriately and gamble cautiously when using this herb. So this is pretty easy to understand. All consumables will have a positive benefit to the hero and decrease the difficulty level. In order to balance properly, battle consumables should be duly priced and some enemies should have access to them as well. The difficulty will remain constant at earlier levels but get easier as time progresses due to the accumulation of consumables and currency. And you know, as you gain levels, you stock up on all these items, so you'll have a lot of them to use at the later levels. And I show a difficulty curve that is shifting even higher for the hero. I think this is a good place to stop for part 2. In part 3, we'll go over their response and feedback to the first assignment and talk about their opinion on the answers. Hopefully we can all have a discussion over there on that video, but part 3 will be a lot shorter than part 2 here. In part 4, we'll go over my answers to the second part of the assignment, which is the gacha system in Golf Clash and Clash Royale, 2 of the most popular mobile games on the market, and they're still very popular today. And then if that video is too long, we'll go over their feedback to that assignment in part 5. So did I get the job? Stay tuned to find out. Thanks for watching.